Does anybody know what I mean by the term hybrid DevOps? Has anybody here used DevOps before? Okay, good show of hands.
It would be good to
That's a good thing.
that. I think my interpretation of hybrid is probably very likely different than yours. So.
Then you're in the right room.
Yeah.
Great, because that's exactly the point of this talk.
Okay.
So, if the clicker works, just by kind of using your voice, tell me a couple of words that you associate with DevOps. What does DevOps mean to you? Collaboration, that's a good one.
Continuous deployment.
Continuous deployment is another really good one. Yeah, okay. So there's a couple of people who sound like they have a pretty good handle on it. I see a couple of people who are kind of like deer in the headlights, not entirely sure. And that's also totally okay. So in order to talk about what DevOps really is, let's talk about a couple of things that it is not. DevOps is not a team. There's a big misconception here, and I know as a developer I've heard this 1,000 times that, oh, the DevOps team will take care of that. Just send it to the DevOps team. They'll test it for you. The DevOps team will do all of these late-night bug fixes. The DevOps team is responsible for everything. Surprise, DevOps is not a team. DevOps requires collaboration from all of the teams throughout an entire organization. It's a complete shift from the way that I guess a lot of government businesses have run before. There's also this misconception that it's an automation process. That, oh yeah, well, DevOps involves this continuous integration, continuous deployment pipeline, therefore we click a button and we're doing DevOps. Also not quite the point. So what is DevOps really? So the word DevOps is a mashup of development and operations, which seems obvious, but it represents a much larger set of ideas and practices. So it includes security, collaborative ways of working, data analytics. There's so many other things that really have to come together in order to appropriately do DevOps. And you'll typically find DevOps at the intersection of people, technology, and processes. DevOps describes approaches to speeding up processes, like a new feature request or a bug fix or maybe a request for an enhancement, anything like that. And it takes everything from development through to deployment in production. And a lot of times people associate the DevOps team or the DevOps as this set of developers who are going to deploy a production product and then walk away. And that's not the point. The point is not for the development team in a DevOps environment to give operations the code and then say, okay, bye. The point is to facilitate from the concept through the maintenance field in production. That is DevOps. It's this continuous cycle throughout the entire life cycle. And when a code goes to operation, they should have that development team that they can reach back and pull that knowledge from, or that development team should be able to jump into that production environment and support from there because they know it, they're familiar, they never leave it. So this obviously means that there's a lot of frequent code changes and a lot of dynamic infrastructure, and traditional management styles just can't keep up with this kind of demand. So we have to dynamically change how we're doing this. So I mentioned that DevOps is kind of this intersection between people, technology, and processes. So what does that mean? What are the goals for people, technology, and processes? People is really the most important part of all of this. If you don't have the right people, everything else falls flat. Communication is key. You're coordinating with a lot of different teams, oftentimes with different organizations, especially in government where we have different contractors on the same project. There may be 5 companies working on any given project, and you have to collaborate between each of those teams and each of those companies, and that's really complex. So if you don't have your people and your communication down, the rest of this is almost irrelevant. The technology is the other critical piece here, because the technology is what provides you the tools that you need to build a stable product. And process is kind of the glue or the mortar that holds all of this together. So process really needs to be what saves you time. What kind of process can we have in place that helps facilitate your communication, or that helps bring in more automation so that we can work in parallel instead of in succession? We rely on all three of these things pretty heavily to integrate together so that we're making a more efficient system and we're really bringing that DevOps culture into the organization. So I know a lot of you, this speaks to my heart. It worked fine in dev. So how many people here have tried to get an ATO? Yeah, it's real hard. And sometimes I think as developers, we get caught up in the product that we're building, and what we come to experience is that the end product almost feels irrelevant. There's so many checkboxes, there's so much coordination that it almost feels like you can't do it. It takes a year, and everybody's frustrated by the end of the process, and then it's irrelevant. And I think that the biggest thing that we're forgetting here is that the security team needs to be brought in first. Really and truly, before you can even bring developers into this, you need to talk to the security team. You need to outline the requirements for your ATO or for whatever kind of authorization you're trying to get, and that should drive your development. So we're breaking down our communication to start with because we're not involving security. The other big part is difficulty in duplicating environments. There's a lot of factors that influence this. It's really expensive to have 2 production environments. There's also a lot of security requirements that go into a production environment. So when you're trying to build a test environment that perfectly duplicates production, it's almost impossible. So this is something that we have to accept. Yeah, there's a lot of times that it worked fine in dev, and you put it into ops and everything breaks. Your developers are upset, they're on late night phone calls, they're having to stay after hours to run a fix in production, which is not ideal. But this is something that we're gonna have to figure out how to work around. This is one of the biggest challenges, especially in government. Then there's this breakdown in communication. And that was sort of what I touched on when I said that's the whole goal of people. The people need to be communicating. And as I saw a lot of heads nodding when I mentioned, there can be 5 different organizations on any given product. This is really important. And this is something that I've experienced on every team that I've worked on. You go and ask somebody for approval, or you go and ask someone for, hey, I need this resource, and you get blank stares. Or you get, oh yeah, I reached out to that person, but I haven't heard back. There's no clear line of communication. It's very difficult to figure out who is facilitating what, and this obviously slows down development and any deployments to production. There's a pressure to succeed. And I think that everybody feels this on some level. And in DevOps and Agile, we always preach, hey, feel free to fail hard, fail fast, fail often. But in government, that kind of changes because the stakes are way higher. We're not talking about like, oh, cool, my Amazon S3 went down, so now I have to turn on my lights like a caveman. Yes, that happened, and yes, it was very confusing. But what we're talking about when we're talking about government production going down, there's lives at risk. This could be a naval ship running aground. This could be troops getting the wrong directions. I mean, this is really high stakes games, and you can't afford for things to go down just on the fly. So we have to figure out what to do with that, because we don't fit perfect DevOps in government there. And lastly, there's this kind of treating technology as a push instead of a pull. And this gets a little bit into economics, but the biggest difference here is what I mean by push. So when you develop a product under the assumptions of if you build it, they'll come, that's what I mean by push. You're creating a product, you're putting it on the market, and then you're saying, hey, come use this cool thing that we built because it's gonna help you. Technology is past that now. We're done with push. That was fine when we were in the 90s, that was fine in the early 2000s, but technology, our dependency, frankly, on technology and the advancements that technology has right now are so far advanced that it's progressing before we can catch up. So we have to change the way we think about delivering technology. We have to convert from this push model to this pull model. And what I mean by a pull model is simply it's a very agile concept. You develop a concept and then you test it. You give it to the end user and you see what they do with it. They get to experiment a little bit and give you feedback, and then you iteratively build on it until you get a more perfect product. And the mental image that I get here when I think about pull markets is picture rowing. So you have a team of rowers, and everybody is pulling and pushing the boat, right? So you're going to pull the boat to move it, and then you have to reset the oar before you can pull it again to move the boat. And it's the same way with these technology products. You really have to get this customer feedback, this end user feedback, because the technology to build it's changing, the needs are changing, society's demands are changing. We can't just push something out there and hope it works anymore. So this is kind of where we get into this hybrid approach. Great, so DevOps is awesome, and Agile as a concept is amazing. We've all heard all of that. We've all read all the statistics on the efficiencies that can drive, the collaboration that's involved. It sounds really great, but especially when you come into government, it starts to break down just a little bit. So we have the traditional waterfall. And waterfall was wonderful for what it was at the time, because initially it's a lot of work. You come up with this huge statement of work that talks about a concept. It provides a clear set of requirements for that concept. And then there may be kind of a kickoff meeting that might be, let's say, a couple days, where you get the actual customer, the end user, the developers, your project managers, your product owners, all of these people you need on this team together. And you give your list of requirements. The development team goes away, and several months later, they come back with a product. But again, where that's breaking down is, cool, so I'm going to put that product on the shelf because we needed it 3 years ago, and now it's obsolete. We have something better. So that's where Agile comes in. So you have this iterative development. It's this constant drive to push forward incrementally. It leverages automation. We try to work everything in parallel. There's frequent changes. So it's almost the antithesis of waterfall if you look at it on paper. So this is where I'm proposing, for the sake of this session, Agile Fall. So Agile Fall hopes to get a better process and a more clear list of requirements, because this is something that waterfall does really well, that Agile, for the purposes of government, kind of misses the mark. And the whole point of that is there's so many different divisions, there's so many different teams, different companies that have to interact, that have to collaborate. If you don't have a clear process or a clear chain of communication or a clear set of requirements, you're slowing everyone down. And I mean, the best example of this is, how many of you have gone to at least 4 meetings this week where you've set up a meeting to have another meeting about a meeting? Right? So this is Agile Fall. This is pulling that list of requirements up front. This is getting that collaboration initially before you start your development, before you need to incrementally make those changes, to kind of outline what the process should be, how the workflow should go, so when your teams come on to develop a product, they sort of know where they are. They know how to get their feet wet. And then we bring in Agile. Then we leverage this automation. We leverage this ability to work in parallel. And we're trying to demo frequent process. So when we get together and we make an app and we're super excited about it, and we want to show the customer, you need to have that as part of this fall. You need to have that outlined so that you're doing your sprints, you're demoing the progress, and then you're taking that feedback. But by then you have the chain of command. You understand where the communication is. You understand who's approving the application, who's promoting it from dev through test through production, because you've brought in some of that waterfall up front. So how do you start? How do you become a hybrid Agile Fall pioneer? Don't be afraid to try new things. And that's a very vague statement. So let me give you an example of kind of what I mean. And I've been incredibly lucky. I've worked with some amazing pioneers. I don't know if you guys sat in on Molly Kane and Jen Hoover's talk earlier, but I've had the privilege of working with both of them, and they're lovely. And when Molly first came into DHS, she had industry experience, but not a lot of government experience. And the beautiful thing that I think we all got to grow from out of that experience was just, she didn't know what the process was. So to her, it was just, I don't know, has anybody tried that? Let's go try that. Let's see what happens. And there have been so many innovations from that, just that simple concept of, has anybody tried it? So if you think of something, if you think you have a way to improve a process or a way to leverage a new technology or to get more engagement with a customer, Try it. Collaborate and share with other teams. So for example, right now I'm on an engagement where I'm working really closely with another company, and neither of us would get anywhere if we didn't talk to each other. And this is as simple as we go to lunch together and we just talk about what we're doing. Hey, it would be really great if you guys could do this couple of things, because then we could integrate in a different way, but that might be more efficient. And it's those kinds of conversations. So you're finding a way to connect with other teams that you need to work closely with. You're getting that repertoire of, hey, let's collaborate. Let's encourage each other to do better things. How can I help you help me? And then actively participating in stand-ups and retrospective meetings. And I know that this is a hard topic for some people. How many of you hate stand-up? I hate stand-up. I'm really bad at making it on time because every team has it at a different time. And sometimes it's really inconvenient. And I know most developers will understand when I say you get in the zone. You start developing something and then you have to stop and go to stand up, and then you lose your place and you come back and you're like, what was I even doing? I have no idea why this computer is here. So I hear you. Stand up is really hard, but this is where the teams get to come together, where you get that quick update that maybe doesn't go as in-depth as it could, but you know, oh, okay, I can talk to this person, or this is my blocker, and somebody else on the call can go, I didn't know that was a blocker. Let me help you out with that. So stand-ups are really important meetings, and equally as important are the retrospective meetings. This is where you get your lessons learned. So this is where all the teams come together and say, we tried something new, and this worked really well, but maybe this didn't. So other teams shouldn't waste their time. We can leverage this new knowledge, and we can bring something else to the table next time. There's also the sprint planning meetings, which are very important, and the backlog grooming meetings. And there are different people who need to participate in those meetings. I would say for developers, if you're trying to do this hybrid DevOps and you're trying to give your developers the most room possible, sprint planning, if you can keep it short, that's a great meeting for developers. Backlog grooming, that's a great thing to maybe bring your developer lead into and have a product owner or a project manager or someone like that kind of facilitate. That way you can leave your troops on the ground. So it would not be a DevOps talk if I didn't give you a demo. If you can bring this hybrid DevOps together and you can get that communication, you can get the technology, and you can implement these processes to facilitate everything, this is kind of the pipeline that you're looking for. So you have your developers who are going to come in with their IDEs or whatever tools they need to develop. You'll start by checking out code. Show of hands here, how many people here are developers? A good bit. Okay, so most people are familiar with checking out code. I see a couple people who look a little lost. So what I mean by this is code is stored in a repository, most of the time in a cloud or something like that. Git, GOGS, several different options here. So checking out code simply means that I'm pulling it from this master repository into a different branch where I can play around with it and not mess up the master or not inflict damage on production, which some of us have done and it's not ended well. Then you're going to build it. So this is just compiling all of that code that you just wrote and making it an actual software product. You can scan the code. So this is, and again, security needs to be brought in initially on this, but this is where they're heavily involved in, hey, is SonarQube the best tool? SonarQube provides static analysis, but maybe you need something else. Maybe you need dynamic analysis. The beautiful thing about this pipeline, SonarQube can be anything. It can be SonarQube and any other product that your security team recommends or relies on for their scans and different processes. You can archive your code. You're going to create the image. You're going to scan it again. So this is just another security check here. Deploy it to development, to test, and then to production. And the thing to keep in mind is this is not over the life cycle of the product or the application. This is every day. This is, I'm a developer, I wake up, I come in the office, first thing that I'm going to do is check out the code. I'm going to make some changes, update it, go through all of these steps. Now, deploying to production you don't do every day. That's probably on a different cadence that you've discussed with whoever your product owner or whoever your end user or customer is. But all of the rest of this, you're continuously checking out code, scanning code, redeploying code to your different environments. And if you can do this hybrid DevOps right, this is going to save you a lot of time getting to production. This is going to make getting an ATO a lot more simple, not easy, but more simple. And hopefully, you'll see a lot of success there. So, are there any questions?
So you had the second security scan.
Yeah.
Are you like differentiating between like the first one and the second one, or is it just like a double check, but it's still the same purpose as the first one?
So that depends on your organization. The way that I have used this in the past is it's been two different types of checks. So typically for me, this scan over here is usually a static analysis. It's just a quick check of the code. Are there any major red flags? What do I need that's very blatant? And then this second scan over here is a more thorough, maybe a dynamic scan, or maybe it's, I've worked with various security teams who have done like Nessus scans and things like that. That would be right here. So this is just the quick and dirty. This is a more invasive scan of your code. Any other questions?
I think you want a GitHub icon up there too.
Mm-hmm.
Here for change management, and maybe an automated test after you go to test.
Yeah, sure. And that's the beautiful thing. This is just an example pipeline. This is not at all what it has to be or what the ideal pipeline should look like. This is just a very basic example. And absolutely, I mean, the more security, the more checks you put in there, the better. And the beautiful thing about all of that is, as you mentioned, a lot of that happens to be automated. So using OpenShift as my primary product with Red Hat, using OpenShift, the last pipeline that I built, I think it took 10 minutes to take code from dev all the way through prod. Any other questions? Comments? Anybody who hates this? All right. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for the presentation. I'm just wondering, I'm not sure you touched on the creation of an audit trail throughout the process, just to understand how, let's say, an application was being built over time, so you can sort of you have some traceability.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So, and that's part of where this archive comes in, right here, right? So we're storing all the logs. So I can go through, I can either look up the logs, or there's various, again, leveraging OpenShift here because that's the product I'm most familiar with. So if I log into OpenShift, I can see exactly how many deployments I've done, which ones were successful. If any of them failed, I can see exactly where they failed. I can go right to the log files for those failures, and that's stored for perpetuity. Anything else? All right. Well, thank you guys. You've been great.